Welcome, everyone. We're going to just wait 1 minute while you all filter in. Welcome. Wow, it's so fun to see the attendees room fill up. This is really very nice. Again, we're going to just wait 1 more minute before we get started. Thank you all for being here. I hope you had a good first morning session and now you had a break. I hope if you're in Madison, you got to get outside, enjoy the above freezing weather for a minute. Okay, we are gonna just launch into it to make the most of our time. Well, hi, everybody. Welcome, if you haven't been welcomed already, to the Social Workers Confronting Racial Injustice Conference 2025. We've been doing this for 10 years. I'm Callie Freitag. I'm an assistant professor of social work here at UW-Madison, and I'm the host and moderator of this session. In this session, I'm so happy you're here for it. It is called Building Trust, Cultivating Liberation, Lessons from Immigrant Community Organizing During the COVID-19 Pandemic. So first, on behalf of the planning committee for this conference, I ask that you join me in acknowledging that our UW-Madison, University of Wisconsin-Madison campus resides on the sacred homeland of the Ho-Chunk people, a place that they call Dajope or Four Lakes. We respectfully recognize the inherent sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk people and the other 11 First Nations people of Wisconsin, or the 11 First Nations, many more people than 11. Whether you are watching this from the land of these 12 First Nations or you are more distant, we encourage you to learn about the history of the land that you're on. As social workers, we have a duty to look critically at the role our profession has played in the attempted cultural genocide and destruction of Indigenous families, as was the aim of boarding schools, for example. This conference aims to bring clarity about the past, but also seeks to challenge and inspire us all into action in our work in communities to support Indigenous rights and racial equity. Now, before I introduce our wonderful speakers, I just have a few logistics for you. So first, you need to know that this presentation is being recorded and will be available on our conference website at a later date. If you have signed up to get CEUs, then you've already done what you need to do to get them. By providing your name and email to access this presentation. So we're logging attendees and we'll email you information on CEUs in a few weeks. For this presentation, your cameras and microphones will remain muted. But we have a Q&A feature where you can submit questions for our presenters. So, and please do this throughout the presentation, and we'll pause periodically throughout the presentation and then again at the end to do Q&As, and I'll moderate that. Just also know that because there's so many attendees here, we already have 62, along with like the 5 in-house people. 63, it just keeps growing. 60, I can't keep up, which is really wonderful. So we may not get to everyone, but please don't hesitate to ask questions. If you have a question, other people probably do as well. Okay, now on to the main event. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our amazing presenters today, Jenni Martinez-Lorenzo and Alejandra Perez. Jenni is the daughter of Mexican immigrant parents with extensive experience in social work. Specializing in family engagement, cultural brokering, and resource coordination, Jenni is committed to supporting Latinx families and communities. She has worked to bridge cultural gaps in educational and healthcare settings, ensuring families have access to essential resources and supports. At Seattle Children's Hospital, Jenni provides cultural consultation to the Eating Disorder Recovery Program, offering Spanish language caregiver training and coaching interpreters to improve care and psychoeducation. Jenni has supported Latinx students and facilitated family relationships with schools. Her work focuses on creating spaces of belonging, advocacy, and culturally responsive care rooted in liberation, equity, empowerment, advocacy, and building cross-cultural relationships for Latinx and immigrant communities. So wow, welcome, Jenni. But that's not all. We also have Alejandra Perez. Alejandra is an organizer, educator, and current PhD student at the University of Washington in Seattle. Born in Guatemala and raised in Seattle, Alejandra's commitment to educational justice stems from her advocacy for undocumented students and their families. With a decade of organizing experience, she has co-founded grassroots initiatives like the COVID-19 Relief Fund for Undocumented Individuals in Washington State, co-organized an undocumented youth organizing summit, and led professional development for educators to advance anti-racist practices. Alejandra's research explores how undocumented organizers build coalitions, practice mutual aid and collective care, and transform schools and communities through liberatory praxis. She holds a Bachelor's of Arts and Master's of Education from the University of Washington, Bothell. So, wow, we are so lucky to have you. The number of participants here just keeps growing. So I'll hand it over to Jenni to get us started today. And thank you.
Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here, for taking the time to be a part of this conference. I want to echo what Kelly said about social work needing to, have a reckoning as to like what our role is when it comes to both our roles just as social workers and the expectations of social workers, and recognizing the ways that we need to disrupt what our role has traditionally, been doing. And so, as Callie said, Alejandra and I are organizers from Washington State, and we're going to be talking to you about some of the work that we did during the beginning of the COVID pandemic. Ale is going to give you more of her side from like the community organizing aspect, and mine more from like a social worker aspect. I'm excited to hear any questions. And so this is Building Trust, Cultivating Liberation, Lessons from Immigrant Community Organizing during the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'm going to give a little bit more background on myself. Like I said, my name is Jenni Martinez-Lorenzo. I have a bachelor's in social work from the University of Washington. I'm currently a MSW student at the University of Washington's School of Social Work. So I'll be completing that program in June. I was born in Seattle to parents from Oaxaca and Guerrero, Mexico. And I really want to highlight that the two states that my parents are from. Oaxaca and Guerrero are among the three states in Mexico that have the highest indigenous population. They have the highest Black population, and they do experience highest rates of poverty. And so I have always very much understood my parents' immigration story and, push and pull factors before I even learned what those were in school. And so, yeah, because of the stories and the experiences that my parents shared, that kind of launched me into organizing and just an awareness, and also social work. And so it's interesting now having these conversations around immigration, ICE raids, because it kind of is like a throwback to when I was a kid experiencing, ICE raids in my neighborhood, or having these conversations of what does safety look like. And so, because of like my own family experience and like my community experience, that led me to organizing with undocumented communities and collaborating with Latina families and communities, specifically in education, around mental health, and in healthcare settings. I currently work as a behavioral mental health therapist intern, specifically working in community mental health, providing bilingual services. The majority of folks that I work with are women, are undocumented, are immigrants. And my work focuses on anti-oppressive, culturally responsive, and community-driven mental health interventions using critical social work practices. I'm good.
Awesome. Thanks, Jenni. And hi, everyone. My name is Alejandra Perez. My pronouns are she, her. I am giving you all a call from Washington State. So it's morning here. Very cold morning, but excited to be here. Like it was mentioned in my bio, I am a community organizer, I'm an educator, and I'm a current PhD student at the University of Washington's College of Education. So I don't come from social work, but I've been in community with social workers since I was really, really young, and had both really great experiences and some not so great. And throughout the last years, I've been doing some organizing, and Jenni and I have met each other now. We've known each other now for over 10 years, kind of doing a lot of this work around working with and alongside, particularly undocumented folks here in Washington State. So we're excited to share with you all a little bit about all of that in a bit. But just a little bit about myself. I was born in Guatemala. I immigrated to the US when I was 12 years old, um, with my mom and my brother. And when I came to the US, I lived in LA and I was there for 3 years. It was awful. And it was the worst time of my life, where I essentially was getting a lot of misinformation of what my family and I, as undocumented folks, had access to. Not only seeing my mom honestly being exploited in her work by having to work 2 to 3 jobs below minimum wage, but then my brother and I getting completely um, misinformation in our schools around what our educational paths could be. Um, During when I was 15, my mom made another decision to move to Seattle. She got connected to some other folks who were from Guatemala, and they told her there was a lot of just better work opportunities in Seattle. And when I moved to Seattle, I went to our local high school. It was Cleveland High School here in Seattle. And actually, who changed my life was my social worker, my school social worker. His name is Ray Morales, and he was the only Latino staff member in my high school, who really took the time to get to know the few of us who are Latino students in the school, but also created like different opportunities for us. He took me and a handful of other folks to a conference 30 minutes south of Seattle, where I learned that as an undocumented student, I could go to college. And that really was what like sparked my interest, not only to get more involved in community, but also to pursue what I am doing today. And he would also like encourage me to like apply to certain programs and things like that. So he was definitely instrumental in my life. And now I'm his colleague, which is actually really fun. He's now a principal at one of our local high schools, and I've had the ability to work alongside him doing some of this really awesome work. So just reminding folks about the power that individuals can have in people's lives. Um, in 2014, I started to organize. In 2012, I started to organize primarily around building and creating educational opportunities, particularly for undocumented students and families. So that involve anywhere from conferences to doing professional development for educators to going down to our state capitol to advocate for like further access around, like, for example, state financial aid and things like that that we have here in Washington for undocumented folks. And that was kind of like essentially all like throughout my undergrad, once I graduated, once I started working full time, but still continued to organize because I knew that was what was going to be the pathway towards liberation for my community in ways that I knew, like, for example, my job in nonprofit was not going to do. Um, in 2020, everything changed, as many of you know. And that's when the organizing that I was doing with the Washington Dream Coalition shifted to do some COVID-19 relief funding, which is going to be what I share with you all mostly today. And yeah, a lot of my work has been focusing not only on how do we learn with and alongside organizers, but how do we build partnerships amongst our different fields to be able to work towards that liberation for our communities. So that's just a little bit about me. So with that, I want to share a couple of things with y'all and then go into the fund. But I know you all have been hearing from Kelly Hayes, and I love the book that she co-wrote. And actually, it's part of my research, which is actually really special. So one of the things that is in that book is this beautiful quote that says, we believe in caring for each other as a form of cultural rebellion. A lot of the organizing work that I know Jenni and I have been involved with is fundamental and grounded in this care of collective care for one another. So that's really truly what has grounded a lot of our work about not doing organizing for the sake of trying to get recognized, but organizing for the sake of caring for our community, and how that becomes part of that cultural rebellion. Another quote that really stands out around like what we're talking about today, since we're talking a lot about mutual aid and other support systems that we've had, is this one around the state has the capacity to help us all survive, even thrive, but in its current form, and it's actively opposed to doing so. We must have the will to survive in collectivity as people who are willing to seize, defy, and whatever they must for the sake of life, dignity, and decency, and for the sake of each other. This is basically just reminding us like our current government, our current state is not here to save us. And the only thing that is going to prevail is going to be our collectivity with one another, despite of the systems that we're in. You all are a system, I'm in a system as well, and we need to do radical transformation of those, but also beyond those systems to be able to truly support one another and survive. But not only that, but also thrive. So essentially just kind of rooting again in that. So I want to talk a little bit about mutual aid, collective care, and interdependence, which are what I like to call some of the foundational principles in organizing that also come up a lot in Let This Radicalize You. Mutual aid really galvanizes community to confront crises and broader battles. So when there is essentially catastrophe that happens in our communities, a lot of us have turned into mutual aid to support one another survive. So that often does happen where it's immediate tactic that allows us to confront these crises, but also to think beyond about what is possible for our communities when this happens. Collective care, like mentioned, a form of cultural rebellion against state control and really seeing our community as self-sustenance. So this just shows that community already has what it needs to survive and to thrive, and that it really allows us to care for one another in ways that systems are just never going to do. And in what ways do we who are in systems continue to uphold this value? And then last but not least, interdependence, which emphasizes a shared responsibility in community survival and collective liberation. So just this constant thing that we depend on one another and that we should, as for the sake of our survival. And then this is part of like the research I'm doing. You get a sneak peek. But essentially just the ways, if I had to put a visual of it, we also have radical imagination that funnels into all of this. So radical imagination is crucial for envisioning futures where oppressive systems like policing and surveillance no longer exist. That also comes from Let This Radicalize You. So how do we think about systems and worlds that don't exist right now, and then how does that channel into our organizing then manifest as at least in these three ways of mutual aid, collective care, and interdependence. So this really does allow us to dream and construct new possibilities for our liberated society and community, so that we can think beyond. So that's just giving you a little bit of grounding for all that we're going to share. And then last but not least, I want to talk a little bit about the difference between activism and organizing. And Jenni here and I are talking about organizing specifically. So activism includes various forms of justice work, adaptable to individuals' cases and interests. So this can be anywhere from a research, if you're an activist scholar, to attending marches, to showing up in community spaces. That's a form of activism. But when we're talking about organizing, we're talking about specific set of practices that focus on intentional relationship building and power analysis. So we're truly trying to think about the ways that relationships And then the work that we do by analyzing this power are truly trying to dismantle all of this. And for us in organizers are these movement builders who use the skills to enact the systemic changes. So the work, like we're saying today, is really around rooted on organizing, not per se activism, but to show you all about the work that we've been trying to do. And then last but not least, I want to cite some research on why this is important. So the importance of learning and social movements. Buyan, who's a social work scholar, talks about the need for us to integrate movement building into education when it comes to social workers. So they share that it's important to bring social movement practices into educational settings to encourage transformative change and critical engagement among social work students specifically. So there's been a move in the social work field to learn from social movements as a way to bring that into the classroom to truly think and change the ways that we do our work in social work. And then this is also a move in education, which is the field that I come from, around equity-oriented scale making, the way that we can learn knowledge and identities through equity-oriented practices that allows us to address and reorganize power relations and how we're seeing that in movement spaces. And then lastly, how social movements are sites of learning that highlight social movements as crucial sites for both critical engagement, strategy development, and reimagining futures. So you can see right here how both Jenni's fields and mine in social work and education are making moves for us to truly start learning from movement spaces to make sure that our praxis is actually aligned with what we're preaching. So that is just where I wanted to ground us this morning. So now a little bit, I did share a little bit of my organizing story with y'all around how I came into this work, but it's been primarily around undocumented youth organizing, and then more recently around undocumented community organizing and what that looks like. So these are just some pictures illustrating kind of that journey. I was student organizing while I was in college at UW-Bothell, trying to fight for spaces for students of color there, but then also beyond that, doing undocumented advocacy trainings, going down to our state capitol to testify to make sure that we got access to state funding for undocumented students, as examples, and then also just creating beautiful community spaces where our community just got to celebrate, such as this picture right here, our undocu graduation. So this is just a little bit about that, but I'm gonna give you a little bit of background on the organization I've been organizing with. So since 2014, I've been a member of the Washington Dream Coalition, which was primarily a network of mostly undocumented folks, and then a bunch of folks got their papers, so also formerly undocumented professionals of color in Washington state trying to address inequities. A lot of our traditional ways of doing this work were around supporting undocumented students access higher ed, training educators who serve them, hosting Know Your Right trainings, advocating for policy change at the state and national level, and providing scholarships for things like DACA renewals. So that was the work of the Washington Dream Coalition from 2014 to 2020. Essentially just trying to address immediate needs in our community for undocumented folks. Everything shifted during the COVID-19 pandemic. So when COVID-19 started and when in Washington state, the stay home, stay safe policy came about, we started to see immediately how for us as organizings, we were seeing firsthand how our families were being financially impacted by the rates of layoffs and unemployment rates as businesses rapidly closed at the beginning of the pandemic. So in response, we shifted all the organizing that we had done from education support services to disaster relief funding for undocumented folks. So on March of 2020, the Washington Dream Coalition created our COVID-19 Relief Fund for undocumented individuals in Washington state in partnership with Scholarship Junkies, the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, and the Washington Immigrant Solidarity Network. So what happened during that time is that we, as the Washington Dream Coalition, had already built so many relationships with other undocumented folks that folks trusted us. We already had trusting relationships, right? As organizers, we have to build trusting relationships. And we were seeing a couple of things. One is that the Trump administration was specifically blocking undocumented folks from getting access to stimulus checks. So any relief funding that was happening at the governmental level was specifically targeting undocumented folks from not getting access to them. That was when we decided to create the fund. And within the first 5 hours, 8 hours, we met our goal of fundraising $100,000. That number kept skyrocketing, particularly from folks donating to the fund, again, because of the trust they had for us. And at the same time, we were getting applications from people in our community who needed access to this funding. So it was during this time that this beautiful image was created by my friend Julie, where she says, when government fails, community provides. And that's what we did. It was this fund was made by 5 of us, Paul, Guillermo, Daniela, Larissa, and I, who were folks who were being directly impacted and seeing our families be directly impacted. And we knew it was our responsibility as folks who care for their community to make sure that we were providing the support for our community when the government was completely failing us. So then,
Ale, can I add in something?
please.
At this time, so Ale mentioned we met back in, I think, 2015, something like that. So I had known of Ale's work, like we had been in like same like organizing spaces. And I remember when like I say the call came out on social media about needing like volunteers and needing I'm like, hey folks, like if you're good and you got a stimulus check, like there's a fund that you can put that money in. And I really want to highlight like it's because of these relationships that we felt this response. Like I know me as a citizen that was still working and wasn't impacted as much. I know that like my responsibility to my community members was like to give my stimulus check and then also like to volunteer as someone that like had time to make calls and like I spoke Spanish. And I remember doing these phone calls where people would like to help people fill out these applications. And at first, I will say like when I was calling about it, there would be some like hesitation. But then when I like would remind them of what organization was putting this on and like a little bit about myself and a little bit about like the history of the organization and some of the work that they've done, it was like super easy to ask questions and like get information from them to then get that application done. But it really wouldn't, what was so effective and so amazing to witness at this time was just truly like watching the way community came together and the way community got so creative and the way community like wanted to see everyone get taken care of. And I think oftentimes, especially during like times like the ones that we're living in, it's really easy to fall into like, let me take care of myself, let me make sure I'm good, instead of recognizing like if they're not good, I can't be good. And so just really highlighting the importance of the fact that this incredible work around the fund was so built on like the years of relationship building and the years of folks getting their material needs met, you know. So just wanted to highlight that.
Thanks, Jenny. Yeah. I think that truly emphasizes kind of like the way that those relationships not only allowed us to cultivate then in a population that is highly vulnerable and often gets put into positions where they're intentionally, like folks are trying to intentionally harm. then creating spaces, and this were all virtual, right? All of us were at home where they can fully trust onto community to support them. So I think that was what was important here, is that all those relationships that we had cultivated from 2014 to 2020 allowed us to create this fund, not only with the trusted folks in the community who donated, but also then cultivate those relationships with the undocumented community itself that we were supporting, to trust us to do this alongside them. So why did we focus on the undocumented community? And this is just a quote from one of the folks who got a little bit of our funding, was that they said undocumented people are actively exploited into risking their lives every day during the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the active climate crisis across the country, in the name of keeping our economy moving, which is upholding the system of capitalism in the country. So we were seeing continuously undocumented folks being framed as, oh, they're the ones who are working, they're the ones who are putting food in our table, rather than being members of our communities, who were also suffering just like everybody else in the pandemic. I myself and my brother told our dad, hey, we want to make sure that we're here. Both my brother and I have work permits. So if something happened to us, we could qualify for unemployment, but my dad couldn't. So this was also partially because we were seeing it quite literally in our homes, and seeing continuously how folks were being asked to go put themselves in very risky environments, without any protections, because they were undocumented. So, what were some of our organizing tactics? And I like to share this because, and it was actually really fun doing this presentation, because I had to go down memory lane to 5 years ago about how everything went down. And sometimes it's like hard to remember, because we were in go mode. And I feel like our minds and bodies were acting faster than what I can even retain today. I was working full time and organizing full time. So I was quite literally on Zoom calls for, 10 plus hours a day, working nearly 80 hours a week, both through organizing and work, doing this because it felt really important. So there was other folks across the country, who were organizing and doing grassroots, mutual aid funds. So I remember attending a webinar where we learned some lessons around what creating mutual aid funds could look like, and things that they told us, like, you should do this or you should not do that, and here's why. So just seeing the labor of sharing learning practices was also really awesome during this time, because we got to learn from funds, for example, like a Black artist fund from Mississippi, as an example. Like, that wasn't the community that we were working with in this fund per se, but we could learn tons of things from them on how to successfully run mutual aid. At the beginning, we set a goal of $100,000 to support 65 undocumented families across Washington. We paired up with nonprofit organizers to use their GoFundMe platform. Um, Nonprofits get lesser fees than if you do it as an individual. And then if you do it as an individual, now you have to pay taxes on that. So we like partner with nonprofits to be able to create that platform. And then they supported us in distributing those funds, and also customer support in case, a check got lost in the mail. We posted an application for folks to request money, and the fundraiser all around social media, which our community already trusted from the previous work that we had done within the community. We surpassed our goal within less than 24 hours. And then that volunteer support that Jenni was mentioning is, we also went out to our community to train folks, to do phone calls, to verify information with all the applicants to make sure that we can get money to them. So they verified information. We also had volunteers help us apply to grants, and then connect to foundations, to raise also not only more money that we could get in the hands of folks, but also to raise operational funds. Because again, we were doing all of this as volunteers. So we wanted to make sure that we could get more time and capacity to be able to do this in our capitalistic world that didn't allow us to just survive during all this chaos. So community does provide. And when that happened is that we created the Grassroots Fund in March of 2020. We successfully raised $7.1 million, supporting over 6,000 undocumented families across the state. So our initial goal of 100,000 for 65 families, I don't even know how many more times that is. I'm not a math person, but it clearly like surpassed. And why? Because of those relationships we had with community. Like I cannot emphasize that enough. There's no way that any of us could have been able to raise $7.1 million if it wasn't because of the relationships we held with others. This fund then became the blueprint to advocate for local and state cash assistance programs for undocumented people here in Washington. So we did get that. We got 3 rounds of funding from Washington State to actually give money to undocumented families, which was millions and millions of dollars. And that grassroots fund was 100% its blueprint. And then we were working alongside others to push the governor's office to give us that money for our community. Then, as the Washington Dream Coalition, we documented all our story and the learnings through a community leader report that was funded by Communities of Opportunity. So that was one of the grants that we applied for because we wanted to make sure that we could share this story for years to come about how undocumented folks organize with and for undocumented folks here in the state of Washington, and how that has created, again, more blueprints for things that our community deserves to get. So I'm going to share just a little bit about this report, and then I'll let Jenni share a little bit about her own work. I know I've been talking a lot, so thank you for your patience with us. But I want to share with you all a little bit about what we learned from our community and this beautiful work that we got to do. So after we did the grassroots fund, then we had an immigrant relief fund that was funded by the state. And that was, again, after months and months of advocacy to try to convince our state that, yes, you can put this money onto the hands of undocumented folks. So we had 78,000 people, undocumented people, who applied for Washington relief in 2020. We also had other folks do other work. So, for example, the city of Seattle also created a fund for undocumented folks, and that was about almost 5,000 applicants. And then our fund, the grassroots one, had 19,000. The Washington, then we had an extra pocket of money, and that was almost 14,000 folks. And then there was a final fund in 2021 of nearly 65,000 folks. So you can see right here, like the money that we gave, it was one-time money. Folks needed more. And that's why all this other programs started to come out, because, you know, getting $2,000 once wasn't going to solve the issues that our community was facing. So this is a little bit of the fund applicants. We have 2 very big counties here. We had King County, which is like the metropolitan area here in the state. And then we had Yakima County, which is primarily rural and an agricultural area here in the state. And that was where we were seeing primarily folks coming from. Majority of this folks lost income when the pandemic hit at the very beginning, and over 50% were high risk of contracting COVID-19 or contracting the virus. What's important to share about all of this is that our fund wasn't per se focused only on workers. It was focused on workers, on caregivers, on people who like had like immunocompromised, who were immunocompromised, so that if them going out to work was going to affect them, then we wanted to support them, because we didn't believe that only work was the reason for you to be able to get money. We believe that people are more than their labor. Over 73% of folks that we had were Spanish speaking, and then the 2 top sectors of work that folks did come from was agriculture and restaurant and food services. So that's primarily of who we were serving throughout this fund. Some of the stories that come from this is that we were able to do focus groups afterwards to learn around like the impact that folks had. So some of the experiences of our community of undocumented folks during the pandemic was that they had a lack of assistance of basic needs. So like housing, healthcare, food, where they didn't have a lot of support of being able to meet those basic needs. There was a lot of also mental well-being and reduced personal or family stress. So a lot of folks felt like isolated and felt a lot of stress to be able to support their families. And then a lot of folks also realized that although these two things were happening, they were trying to stay connected to their community for their emotional well-being. So yes, like COVID was really stressful, and so we're like the lack of getting access to our jobs, but at the same time, we're trying to stay connected to our community to feel emotionally well. What we learned from this is that basic needs must be met. And I don't think that's going to be a shocker to many folks here, but that was something that was so small that our communities just need, is that once again, systemic failure didn't allow folks to be protected, and that we need to continue to build and sustain and feed our communities to truly meet our basic needs. This is a quote from one of our participants who said, "I try to give the information to my coworkers and tell them to share it with their neighbors, their family members, right? Because that is what we need right now to unify as an immigrant community." So we would hear stories from folks who would go to their workplace and say, "I heard about this fund. Everybody here should apply." And those like word of mouth relationships and the trust that folks had is what truly allowed folks to feel like they were connected to others to get the support that they needed during this time. We also had a lot of things that we found around inequity in regional responses. So depending on what part of Washington State folks were in, they were getting access to things or not. So we were like, the things that we found from this is that we need more help from our governments to support our communities, knowing that they have continuously failed us. We needed to remove barriers and have responsive local organizations. So folks would often mention like which organization supported them, either to find out about the funding or to get access to other resources like food banks. And then our folks were saying we really need access to health insurance because undocumented folks are not eligible for it. So they really wanted to advocate for health insurance. So we just wanted to make sure that our aid did support folks, but we had still over $50 million that we were not able to fundraise to support community. So to address this, we know that we need these barriers to end and be removed so that undocumented immigrants can access healthcare and economic supports. Another quote, real quick, from another applicant was, "Honestly, it is very beautiful. It feels nice. Even though we're undocumented here, to have support like that is well received and it feels beautiful." So we saw that our community truly felt like for once they were being included in systems that were not, even though it was all grassroots felt, they felt like somebody was there to care with and alongside them. One other thing that we learned is that we need transformative systems change. So we need, the things that we learn is that we need permanent supports that promote long-term stability for undocumented immigrants and families. We need to be able to seek medical care without fear of cost. And we need ongoing mental well-being supports to reduce personal or family stress. So what does that mean? Is that we need to build a better world. So for undocumented immigrants, like all community members need sustainable supports. This includes medical care without fear and comprehensive mental health care for a community. Another quote is that challenges are already very big and they did not necessarily come about because of the pandemic. They already existed. So that's one thing that we noticed, is that these fears and these challenges were enhanced during the COVID-19 pandemic, but they were already there and they continue to be here and none of them have changed. So we need to continuously be advocating for our community. and I think this might be the last one, but there was also about what does community care and response look like. So what we learned was that staying connected to our community for emotional well-being was something that came out a lot. So folks were like really connected to their community during this time to get support from one another. Um, there was community voice organization resources and support that was really helpful for folks. So when they would share, like, this organization really helped me, like they really meant it, and that they needed job security and family safety. So we care for each other, and this continues to come out. Why does that word keep coming out? Because that's the answer. So in this project that we did, it was important to us to highlight community strengths as well as needs. The name of the report is Community Provides for a Reason. We started this based on community efforts and wanted to go beyond that. We want the state to do this so it's not only up to community. So we really needed to care for one another, and we did. We needed the states to step up, and they did after lots of push, but nothing was permanent. And that's why we continue to advocate for permanent solutions for our community. So some of the recommendations that came out of the report after we did it and our learnings from doing this grassroots fund is that our community needs at least this for things. One was unemployment insurance for undocumented people. There actually was a hearing yesterday here in Washington. We continue to try to advocate. The bill has failed twice. We're hopeful to see if this year it will pass. It has passed in other states like Colorado, where unemployment insurance for undocumented folks is available. So that is something that here in Washington we continue to advocate for and hope that we're going to get. The number two was healthcare insurance. This actually passed last year. So now undocumented folks here in Washington have access to healthcare insurance regardless of age, because in most states it's only while you're a minor. But this has something that we were advocating for that was like the number two ask. Like folks not only wanted unemployment insurance, but wanted healthcare insurance, right? We're talking about a pandemic that continues to exist. So we need access to this healthcare support so that our communities don't fear and cost can get in the way of them getting access to healthcare. Three was cash assistance without restrictions. So we also saw a lot of programs trying to come up that had a ton of restrictions, such as you have to have like US-based documentation, which a lot of our communities didn't. So continue to have cash assistance without restrictions, like the programs that we did that didn't have major barriers for folks to access. And then last but not least was to continuously listen to community, which is something that all of us, regardless of the job that we're in, need to be doing to make sure that we're centering those who are most impacted. And I'll end, I think, with this quote. Let me just double check if that's my last slide. No, it's not. But one of the last things here is this quote from one of our community members who said, "We're very happy and thankful to know that there are people who care about us. We have 2 children in the home whose school life has been interrupted. I was so worried about paying rent that we haven't been able to support them with their schoolwork. Now, with this support, I feel like my children, my wife, and I can breathe." So we saw just a lot of the impact that folks had. And again, it all came down to care about how folks care for it and how we took the time to care for our community. And then last thing, oh no, this is not it. This is me. But that's a little bit of what we did with the Washington Dream Coalition and the various ways that folks supported us throughout this time. I know that was a lot, so I will stop right there and just ask Callie. I don't know if there's any questions. And if not, I'll go ahead and pass it to Jenni to share a little bit with us about her work.
So right now there's not questions in the chat, and I'll invite the audience to write Q&A in the chat. And then I think in the interest of time, we'll just handle them at the end. Does that sound okay to both of you? So Jenni can get her share in as well. Okay. All right, Jenni.
Sounds good. Okay. I can share my screen.
Building Trust, Cultivating
Oh, that's
Liberation
not
by
it.
Jenni and Alejandra.
Okay. My bad, y'all. Okay. So, thanks so much, Ale, for that was just so inspiring to hear again. Like, just I love it. Okay. So in February 2020, so I'm going to be speaking a little bit about my experience working as like a social worker in the pandemic and also partnering with other community organizers like Ale. And so our experience during, or my experience during the beginning of the COVID pandemic, that is still, around. So in February 2020, I began work at a really well-trusted community-based organization that was providing youth and family services. So at this time, my role was the family advocate. Essentially, I was supporting families by providing resources on transportation, medical, translation, legal, immigration, education resources, and also creating participant-driven programming. A majority of my work really was trying to find like community-based resources, also trying to promote like groups for parents because parents were feeling a lot of isolation and were feeling a lot of overwhelm. What I found in this role was while there was like, for example, school supports, a lot of them failed to communicate effectively with the families I was working with. A majority of the families, actually all of the families I worked with were, most of them were Spanish speakers primarily, and a majority of them were also undocumented. So being someone that was working with them at this time, a lot of the support that they were asking for or resources that they were asking for was really just getting their basic needs met, getting the basic needs of their children met. And really, I found that it was community that came together, whether it was, a lot of times the participants, the families that I worked with would let me know sometimes of like different resources that they had accessed that had been really helpful for them. And so that was kind of the work that I was doing. Sorry. So all families either spoke only Spanish or primarily spoke Spanish. 100% of them were Latinx families. A majority of them worked in the restaurant industry, in hospitality, or in the labor workforce, which were all highly impacted industries. A majority of the folks I worked with were undocumented and did not qualify for unemployment or stimulus checks or healthcare. And also education materials and information about the vaccine and about COVID in general weren't widely available in different languages. And also once the vaccine rollout hit Washington and was available for like the general public, the registration process for the vaccine was not accessible to non-English speakers. And this is something I experienced when helping my own parents try to get the COVID vaccine. I had to go with them because there was like no signage in different languages. There was no interpreters at the hospital. And so I recognized like, okay, if my parents are experiencing this barrier, then plenty of other people who also are non-English speakers are likely to experience the same barriers. And so I just wanted to share this quote. For me, relationship building is as much of my politic as my commitment to abolition is. or my commitment to anti-capitalism. Some people see building relationships as a chore, but I actually feel like you've got to believe in it. You have to believe it matters. And I mean that I know that it should be the heart of our work. We are all we have. And the state has been very consistent with failing our communities, with not creating supports, not creating the infrastructure needed. It could if it wanted to, but it does not. And so what is left? Us. And so that we have a duty to each other. And I think oftentimes we forget in social work that relationships are really what it should be all about, and meeting people's material needs, not just helping them navigate these systems, not just connecting folks to resources. I know for myself, I dream of a world where social work isn't a thing, like where we don't need social workers. Because people's needs are met, people are thriving, people are taken care of. And that is absolutely a possibility. I love that Ale talked about radical imagination. I feel like the pandemic, as painful as it has been, it also has opened up the door to so many possibilities and so much creativity and so much wisdom. Like our communities have so much wisdom, and being able to be in community and tap into that wisdom and share information and share strategies really has been what has taken care of our communities. So part of the work that I did at this organization was promoting connection and creating community spaces. And so one of the asks from specifically like the women that I worked with, majority of them were mothers, was, can we have like an established like women's group? And so we created a women's group, and this was in November 2020. Remember, I started working there in February 2020. So it took a few months, almost a year, to like really build some sort of relationship with the people that I was working with. And so in the first group that we all met together, they established their name. They chose how frequently that they were going to meet. They brought topics that they wanted to discuss, and also just like activities. And so the name that they chose for themselves was Mujeres Guerreras, which is warrior women, which I love. And so each session included a check-in, announcements, and an invitation to facilitate the next group or to bring in activity. There was a topic, but no detailed content. The conversation kind of went where it needed to. And so we would have these virtual meetings through Zoom every Friday. And we would have like the section for the announcements where we would talk about different resources, like, oh, there's this clinic happening, there's this specific food bank for our community that's opening up. There's this tutoring night that we're going to be hosting for their children. And so it was during these sessions that I got to build a deeper relationship with a lot of these women, and I got to know them on a level that wasn't like as the social worker of the group, just like as someone, who was helping facilitate and also sharing about myself. I know there's something about social work where it's like disclosure, like, should we disclose things about ourselves? I personally think like, if you're in community, you're in community. And if there's no way to show up in community unless you're you. So that's my take on that as a social worker, because that's only helped me connect with folks even more. In April 2021, we, in partnership with another organization, hosted a vaccine clinic. And okay. The vaccine clinic, it was a bit of a, it took a minute to get our organization to agree to a vaccine clinic. There was a lot of vaccine hesitancy. There was a lot of like hesitancy around like COVID. Like when I first would bring it up very gently, the women in the group wouldn't really respond, which is fine, you know. It took a while to really get some sort of conversation going in this group about the vaccine or about COVID. And honestly, it mainly just started off with like, do any of you have any questions? I want to highlight the fact that Spanish speakers are extremely vulnerable to misinformation. Misinformation in Spanish on social media is a lot less likely to get flagged and corrected. And one thing about our community is that we love Facebook and being on social media. And so what I found was that there was a lot of misinformation out there. And, you know, misinformation that like my parents knew about, and then I would talk to them about it. But as I said, there wasn't really a lot of easily accessible, comprehensive, correct information about COVID, about the COVID vaccine. And so really, as this group went on, part of the announcements would always include a conversation or like an opportunity for people to ask questions about the COVID vaccine or about COVID in general. And so once we had an established date for the vaccine clinic, I would make phone calls to the women who were a part of this group, and I would just ask their opinion about it, if they were interested in registering for the clinic. Some of them said yes, some of them said no, and some of them said, I still need to think about it. And so I started those calls in January. And it took until like the week before the vaccine clinic for, I think everyone except 2 people ended up getting vaccinated. And so I think that just highlights like there's no timeline. You build relationships and you earn people's trust. And by earning trust is like you showing up, you keeping your word, you being a person, not just a social worker to them. And, you know, once that trust was cultivated, and also like I would share about my experience and my parents' experience getting the COVID vaccine. And they would sometimes call me a bunch of times within one day, like, oh, I had another question. I had another question. And I think that just highlights like people want an opportunity to be heard, even if like people want an opportunity to be heard because their lived experience is their expertise. And so not for nothing, you know, our communities were hesitant about the COVID vaccine. Like this government hadn't cared about them this whole time. Why would they listen like now? And so I just really wanted to highlight the fact that like it took over a year for these women to be really frank with me about their thoughts on the COVID vaccine, on COVID in general. And but overall, like, yeah, everyone except 2 ended up getting the COVID vaccine. And you know, when we had our group after that, that clinic, everyone shared about what it felt like. Did they have any symptoms? How was it? And it was just a space where people could share their fears and also could get like really good information and also be in community with other folks who were hesitant, but did it anyways because they trusted the information that they were given. Okay. So I became a social worker because I was an organizer. And I want to share a little bit about what brought me into social work. I shared that my parents are from Mexico. They're from southern Mexico. My dad side of the family is Indigenous. My mom's side of the family are Black. Those intersections have really impacted the way I grew up. And I grew up with a dad who was a storyteller. So my lessons and my politic were really influenced by my parents' migration story, by watching the way they were left out of policy. I witnessed my parents' rage and like heartbreak, and also I have a complicated relationship with the word resilience, but like resilience, I think in times of that feel like catastrophe, I often remind myself of my parents and their story and how, and I also think of my ancestors, like how things felt probably really impossible for them, and yet here we are. And so, yeah, there's baby Jenni. My parents would take us to the May Day parade. My dad would talk to us about, you know, he would organize boycotts in his job when their boss wouldn't want to pay them. A majority of my dad's coworkers are undocumented. He's in the labor industry. And so I very much witnessed through my dad's storytelling, through my parents' storytelling, through their actions, just that informed my worldview. And so I remember back in 2010 was when the Washington State Dream Act was like up for a vote. And it was through Facebook that we got invited to a watch party with this organization called One America. And we went, didn't pass. It was very sad, but my mentor, someone who ended up becoming my mentor, Maha, she approached me and my family who had gone to that watch party and asked us about, you know, what's our story? That was her question. What's our story? And I don't think anyone had ever really asked like my family, like, what's your story? I grew up in an area that is very affluent, white, was not very diverse. I mean, it's still not very diverse, but I lived in like the one neighborhood that had all like the only people of color in Redmond, Washington. And so no one had asked what our story was. And through that conversation, we became involved with this organization, One America, my brother and I. And we started, you know, also doing advocacy work, doing Know Your Rights workshops, bringing that information to a really underserved community within the East Side where we lived. And through that work, I also ended up working in like the education sector. I guess what I hope to highlight is my personal experience and what I witnessed in my family informed my lens. And it ended up leading me to social work. I know we've only got a few minutes left, but I want to talk about critical consciousness. So critical consciousness is the process of continuously reflecting upon and examining our own biases, assumptions, and cultural worldviews, and how our biases, assumptions, and cultural worldviews affect the ways we perceive difference in power dynamics. There's an inherent power dynamic when we are the social worker, right? That just is what it is. And it's on us as social workers to really think about how even like the micro interactions that we have with communities, what is the power dynamic here? And how do I, as a social worker, negotiate that power and also just like give it up when I need to? For example, I learned so much from the women that I worked with, especially in 2020. They were women that rallied around each other, that gave information word of mouth, that shared resources with me that I didn't know about. And so we got to like truly partner and like be peers in like figuring out how to support each other. And so it's important for us, like when it came to that work, I'm thinking about the fact that I speak English. I'm thinking about the fact that I am a citizen. I'm thinking about the fact that I am coming into this space as a social worker. So how do I give up power? How do I be in community with people in a way that promotes like their own power? So I think that's like critical consciousness, I think, is something all social workers need to be working on, especially that part of like giving up power. I just want to highlight that stories are so important. Stories are what bring community together. These are pictures that I took from the last time I was in Oaxaca. And this is all art that tells stories, and that also connect folks. Art is important. Storytelling is important because it helps build relationships. I'm just gonna skip to my little reflection. Social work is inherently political. If you don't see your social work as political, you probably shouldn't be a social worker. I'm just gonna say that. Storytelling is like critical social work. It's knowing what thread you're adding to the tapestry that you recognize you're a part of. Like, we are not outside of community, or at least we shouldn't be. We are a part of community. People make sense. You know, the women that were really hesitant about the vaccine, it made sense why they were hesitant. It made sense why people were unsure whether to trust the information coming out about the vaccine and about COVID. People's lived experience is expertise. I'm really hoping to like highlight that, yes, we are social workers, but we are not the only experts in the room. We have so much to learn from both community work. So community-led efforts lead to the most impact. You know, Ale highlighted, you know, the work that the Washington Dream Coalition did. I feel like social workers need to have their finger on the pulse of what the community work is already happening. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to like create what's already being done. And so, like I said, community-led efforts lead to the most impact. So who are you accountable to? Who are you looking to for leadership when it comes to, you know, what community needs? Social workers increasing like their critical consciousness, understanding their own story, understanding their own role to play in these social movements empowers you to organize. Social workers should be organizers. You should be organizing if you're a social worker. Your work should be political, because it's not just about supporting people. It's about making sure people have their material needs. It's about making sure that people are cared for. It's making sure that at some point we don't need social workers because the infrastructure for care is there. I know that it's been a really heavy-ish few weeks for us here. But I would like to share a poem that Kelly shared with me back when I was 16. I met her at this like activism art camp back when I was 16. And one of like the radicalizing moments in my life was just her storytelling. I learned about so much different organizing that was happening in Chicago. I learned so much history about organizing. And I learned about Assata Shakur. I didn't know who that was. So really, storytelling is a tool for education and for hope. And so I just want to leave you with this. And I believe that a lost ship steered by tired, seasick sailors can still be guided home to port. This is my call to action to the social workers. Find your political home, find the community work that's already being done, and find ways to leverage the power that you have to uplift what's already being done in the communities around you. Thank you.
I'll be your audience of one, but we have an audience of about 100. Jenni and Alejandra, thank you so much for your stories that are meant to inspire and a call to action, and especially the call for social workers like myself to be critical and be political in times where we're actually being encouraged often by government agencies that we work for to not be any of those things, right? So I really appreciate that. So the session has technically ended, but if you have like 5 minutes to stay over time, for people who want to stay, we had a good question in the chat and Alejandra started to answer it by text. But the question was, is it fair to say that your identities as an immigrant yourself, Alejandra, or a child of immigrants, Jenni, and both of you being Spanish speaking, is it fair to say that those identities played a significant role in your ability to cultivate trust? And the question asker goes on to say, like, I work for a very small nonprofit doing housing rights work, and we're continually trying to connect and earn the trust of immigrant and non-English speaking populations to turn to. But it sounds like, and then she asks, are there any suggestions for overcoming that identity barrier when we don't belong to that identity group we're trying to connect with ourselves?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can start. I mean, I started typing because I know we were
Yeah.
running out of time.
Sorry.
But something that I know that our communities do and believe is that they really look at our values and how those are being showcased through our actions. Um, I am not friends or in community with folks based on simply having similar identities to them. Now, is that majority? Yes, because it's easy to connect with the people in your community. But also, the folks who I trust the most are people who have the same values as me. People who I know are going to show up for me. People who I know if they need me, I'm going to show up for them. So I think in what ways are we showing our values to showcase those actions? So I'm thinking about like the different ways that resources can be shared, right? If you don't speak Spanish and you're working with Spanish communities, like what materials do you have accessible that folks can access, even if it's not through dialogue, but it is through like a handout or something like that. I think a lot about the art that we have in our spaces. If you have an office and it's blank, it doesn't show me who you are. So like if you have like immigrant posters or not stereotypical, please, but like things that are like truly do show like your values. I have an office at UW. You can see who I am based on the art I put on the walls. It shows my values, it shows the actions that I'm in. And then I think then taking the time to listen to folks and build relationships with them, even if there is a language barrier, I think just taking the time to say hi to people, to get to know their stories. Like Jenni mentioned, somebody asked, can you share your story with me? That is truly what overcomes some of those identity. I wouldn't say they're barriers, but like differences that we all have, and differences isn't something that's bad. And I think taking the time to do that. A lot of the people who I started to trust about being undocumented were white folks. That's who schools are built with. Now, I was very careful about trying to see, but it was their actions. Like they showed me that they were interested in knowing who I was, and then I would like share with them that I was undocumented and got tons of support with them. So I think it's truly demonstrating that you are committed to their struggle, because it's your struggle as well in different ways. It's important. But I don't know, Jenni, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I 1,000% like values and actions. I think one thing with social work, I think that comes up a lot is like, how am I going to work with a community that culturally maybe I don't identify with, or like ethnically I don't identify with. I think, again, that like is where that critical consciousness piece is, where you understand, like Ale said, like your liberation is tied with mine. So I'm going to take the time, even if like it's hard to connect, I'm going to take the time to build a relationship, even if it just means like I'm calling to say hello. And even if it's just calling to say hello, but not getting like a form done. Or oftentimes when I'm working with families for the first time, like I share about myself and I bring like an offering. Like, hey, I just wanted to let you know about these resources or this event that's happening. I'd love to see you there. I think one thing that is like very rooted in capitalism and like white supremacy and social work is like wanting to have like relationship building happen super fast. That's not how people work, and that's okay. And yeah, relationship building takes time, and that's okay. I think that's one of the little ways we can disrupt and can push back like this white supremacist culture that is in social work. And so people know why they take their time to get like open up. People know why they take their time to, you know, access services, and just trusting that they have their reasons, they have their expertise. You just got to be consistent with showing up, with making those calls, with having offerings. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm feeling the call to action, and I'm reminded by what by something you said, Jenni, that urgency is a value of white supremacy. And I think in these times where we feel so anxious and feel these capitalist pressures, to remind ourselves of that and to not give in to these values that we are actually trying to disrupt. And so thank you so much for that. I'm really moved and inspired, and I know the people on this panel are as well. So thank you so much for sharing your time, your expertise, your experiences. Just thank you so much for doing this. And I encourage all the audience to take these ideas and challenges into your work that you're doing every day out in the world. So next steps, so there's a little bit of a break, and then at 2 p.m. Central, noon, if you, like our presenters are on the West Coast, Kelly Hayes and Mariam Kaba are going to be our plenary speakers. So check your email for that link, and you'll be on YouTube instead of Zoom this time. In a couple weeks, if you signed up for CEUs, you'll get an email about that. And this session and most of the other breakout sessions have been recorded, and they'll be posted on the conference website pretty soon. So again, thank you so much to our presenters. Please, everyone else, go take a break. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.